If you're a man, don't share something that happened 3 years ago that you went through. Scrape to share something that is vulnerable and scary to share now with people that are close to you. The worst thing I see in community is when people think they're being vulnerable, but they're not. And then what we're left with is all of this separation in that community. The best thing that you can do to create vulnerable connections is to be the initiator, but that starts with you being vulnerable with God first, so that he can meet your capital S source of needs. And then after that, bring it to people so that you can experience love with skin on. That's the power of vulnerability. What's up, guys? So what is vulnerability exactly? I hear so many people talking about vulnerability, and I think, we've heard its context for why it's valuable in so many different settings. We think about, and I've said this before too, the vulnerable leader, right? We trust people that share their failures with us, that share their inadequacies, that share their insecurities, what's going on with them. In relationship, we're like, man, I can't connect with someone until I can see them. And also there's this difference between vulnerability and transparency. What is that difference? And I think I want to unpack some of that stuff, because I had a coaching call the other day with some entrepreneurs, and I had a guy go, hey, can you help me understand what vulnerability is? Because I was talking about vulnerable content and how valuable that is for viewers, for people to connect with you as a leader or an influencer. And I noticed, I was like, oh, this is probably a good topic to talk about for a lot of us. And I think for especially men, we don't see that as a good trait. We don't see that as something that is admirable. We think a lot of men think that vulnerability is what it is. It's like it's weakness, right? And to a degree, but it's exposed weakness. And exposed weakness is not a strength in military, in fighting, in combat, and things like that, right? But are we always fighting? Are we always in combat? And are we always in those settings where we don't want to reveal our vulnerabilities? I don't think so. I think vulnerability is a strength in relationship, and it is a weakness in battle, right? That's why men are so protective over it, is because there's that part of us that wants to make sure that we're not left weak, that we can still be strong. But also there is a weakness in this, that we're still reacting to things that happened to us in our past that gave us the belief system that we can no longer be vulnerable ever again with people. We can't be seen. We can't show our weak traits. And if you're a father, you're a husband, you're probably wondering, how do I connect with my wife, my kids better? Well, vulnerability is one of the number one things that you're gonna have to learn. And that takes the most strength and courage in order to do. But we all need to learn vulnerability. One thing I want to just say is that there is a difference between vulnerability and transparency. I would describe it this way. Transparency, in my mind, would be that you can see into my life or my heart, but you can't affect it. So I have a big bulletproof glass window between us. You can see everything, but if you try to reach your hand in and touch it, you're not going to be able to. So when I share something from my life that is an inside scoop into things that I'm going through, you may not be able to affect me. So it's not vulnerability, right? You can be like, hey, you could say whatever you want. You could say, hey, that's really stupid that you're going through that. It's not going to affect me. You could say, oh man, I'm so sorry you're going through that. Like, is there anything you need? And it's not going to affect me. I'm not going to receive or feel your compassion because I'm not letting you affect me. Vulnerability would be, I'm giving you permission to affect me. You have the ability to harm me with what you say or how you respond, but you also have the ability to help me. Now, here's where I would say vulnerability goes too far, is when you give somebody permission to destroy you or give you life, right? It's that desperate need for someone to affect you. I think at that point, you're allowing somebody into your God spot. That's a lot of what codependency is. Codependency is I desperately need your response to whatever I'm going through in order for me to be okay. That only happens when you don't have God in your God spot. It's this empty void that needs to get full. It needs to get filled with someone or something. We fill it with our jobs, with our successes. We fill it with relationships and the way that they respond to us. We fill it with spouses. We fill it with all sorts of different things, our social media responses and praise and criticisms. And that's all very unstable and shaky ground. And this is the best way I've ever heard this. We all have needs. There are capital N and lowercase n needs. I would say capital N needs would be the needs that you get met by God. So we have our foundational needs met by him. He's our highest source of each one of our needs. Validation, he's our highest source of that. We need to get that from him. Our need for significance, our highest source, we get that met from him. Our need for security, our highest source, we get that met from him. Now let's look at all those things. If I don't have my need of security met by God, where am I going to go to? Money. I'm going to go to my community. I'm going to go to, if I'm a pastor, I'm going to go to my church and their tithe. Where is that insecure place going to get met if God's not meeting it? Well, we go to other sources. And that's when we're allowing people that should have the ability to meet a lowercase n need meeting an uppercase n need right there. They're becoming a capital S source of something in our lives. Well, that vulnerability is not going to be healthy. But if you have that highest source of needs getting met, well, now you can go, oh, I am still going to allow myself to be tender and affectable by people in my life. So if somebody hands me $20, even though my source of security and provision was in God, well, when somebody gives me money, I can still be vulnerable and go, whoa, and that can impact my heart because I'm not hardened to it. But I also have to recognize, like, is there a block here that keeps me from being tender towards people, that keeps me from being affectable towards people? Was there something that happened in a past experience that told me you can never be tender or affectable again? Those are the things that we need to recognize in our lives that keep us from vulnerability. The reason why vulnerability is so powerful is because it lets people know that you're not perfect, and it lets people know that you're approachable. It also lets people know that you're a human and that love has a landing pad. People feel very powerful when their love affects others. When you're a person that when somebody loves you and it has a landing pad, that person wants to bring more of their gift of love to the table. That's how interpersonal relationships start to flourish, is there's an exchange that builds upon itself, that grows into deeper and deeper connection. That only happens in the context of vulnerabilities being exposed. If you're a man, don't share something that happened 3 years ago that you went through. Scrape to share something that is vulnerable and scary to share now with people that are close to you. The worst thing I see in communities is when people think they're being vulnerable, but they're not. And then what we're left with is all of this separation in that community. The best thing that you can do to create vulnerable connections is to be the initiator, but that starts with you being vulnerable with God first, so that he can meet your capital S source of needs. And then after that, bring it to people so that you can experience love with skin on. That's the power of vulnerability. I hope this was a valuable video. Hope you got a lot out of it. If you're a leader, I really encourage you to take on the gift of vulnerability in your leadership. If you're someone that's in relationships, wanting your relationships to get better, really encourage you to be more vulnerable. And if you're a man, I really encourage you to go on the journey of vulnerability, because you know what? It's going to bless your life with your spouse, with your kids. You're gonna have so much more connection. It's gonna be so much better for you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if this blessed you. If you want more videos like this, obviously subscribe to the channel. Love and appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for coming by.